Welcome, my friend, to Next Level Change Success. I'm Therese, a change strategist and practitioner with over 20 years of experience designing and delivering impactful change programs across various industries. In this podcast, I share real-world practical strategies to help you create and deliver positive change experiences, whether you're a leader, practitioner, or someone looking to bring new ways of working to life. In today's fast-paced world, change is constant. Here we focus on how you can put people at the centre of your change strategy, because people with a sense of purpose are the most important link in driving performance. So if you're ready to create meaningful change and achieve all the success that comes with it, keep listening. Together, let's change the conversation and take it to the next level. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Next Level Change Success. My name is Therese, and I'm the founder of myvirtualchangemanager.com. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I am recording on Tharawal country, and I would like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians and owners of the land on which I am recording, and to elders both past, present and emerging. So today we're talking about how do you size change effort? How do you resource the change appropriately? I'm going to take you through the method that I would use, the questions I would use as having headed up a change practice, been a change director, and what is appropriate and what options you might have that you may not have thought of. And why do we bother sizing change effort anyway? Sometimes this has to do with how mature your change practice is, or even if you're simply looking to hire a change manager for your project program. Could be the first time that you're engaging change managers or change management expertise, and you do have a range of options. The thing with change effort is, over time, part of the flow on from this is the resource conversation. Who do I need to hire? And change capacity conversation. It lends into your planning discussions, and it's something that does need to be checkpointed and reviewed at least 2 or 3 times a year to ensure that you're always keeping your change practice lean or your change resourcing as efficient as possible. I know that this might grind a little bit if you're a change manager and you're listening to this, because you always feel like you're under pressure as a change person to deliver and deliver well. That is a reality, especially if you're in an organisation which is not yet mature in its approach or understanding of change. Sure, they might say they want change resource, but then they don't necessarily want to pay for it. So let's go through the sizing of change effort. The first thing I'm going to look at is the project or program, the scope of it, what's being delivered, so that I can get a sense of what the change is and how broad the change is. Part of the scope conversation is also timing. And so looking at what is the timing, when is it going to happen, what phase is the project or program in, to then start to consider who are the people or what type of skill sets am I going to need when I'm hiring a change person for this particular piece of work. The other thing in relation to timing could be, and especially if there's a portfolio of work happening, a lot of this has to do with being able to flex and have resource roll, particularly off a piece of work, have a bit of downtime, because the reality is change is full on from the time you're on board the program, depending upon how close the timing is of the go live. And then there's also the embed phase. And everyone needs a bit of a break. I always talk about the constant need from a performance perspective is that everyone doesn't go and play grand final every day. And you need to ensure that you're giving your change people just the right amount of time, engagement, and not overloading them. It is one way for burnout to take place, and it's not a very good way to engage or reward your change people if they've done a good job, just to throw them into the next big project or program. You need to consider that if you're running a change practice, or if you're looking from an enterprise perspective, how to have your resource constantly engaged and growing and developing and having those discussions with the individuals. So I'm going to look at the program. I'm going to look at whether it's a program or project. I'm going to look at who is being resourced in that project already, because a lot of the partnerships that get developed between project managers and change managers in a project environment, it's personality based. Sometimes if people have worked well together, project manager will ask again to have the same change person. But I also want to consider that change person's own growth journey and not just simply comply with the request from a project manager that they're comfortable with that person, so therefore they're happy just to have that person. There's a lot of dynamics that you need to manage when you're running a change practice to put your change person in the best position possible, as well as the project, as well as the organisation. And you have to manage all those layers to ensure that you're getting the right flex happening for everyone in the project or program. So off the back of the project, the program, and I'm looking at their resourcing. So for example, if there's a business analyst on the project or the piece of work, then I know that the change person could leverage from a good BA if they're a process-based BA, if they're used to doing all the analytics and sharing that with the change person. And so at the fundamental of all of this is the concept of teaming. So I'm having a look and seeing what skills and resources already exist within that project environment to see where the change person can leverage versus doing a lot of the work. Then what I'm looking at as a byproduct of that is, of course, the impact assessment. Looking at if there's been pieces of work delivered like this before. Are there structures in place that once again can be leveraged so that the change effort can be minimal, so the change person doesn't need to get involved in everything? And that's part of the briefing that you would look at from a change perspective for any person coming into a piece of work, which is more a systematic review, impact assessment, communication element. When looking at the impacts, you're looking at whether there's training required. And you're looking at how much communication needs to happen. And also, is this piece of work on high visibility, high risk, high reputational risk for the organisation? Then I'm definitely going to be putting a change person on that who has worked in that environment and been able to navigate a politically sensitive piece of work, for example, or a piece of work which is critical and customer facing. I'm going to ensure that the person who comes in does have that experience and background because they understand what's at stake and what needs to get supported. So consider all these different elements when it comes to the effort and the expertise that you're looking to bring in. So the impact assessment is very high level, and typically when it comes to who you're going to get to assess this, you really want someone who has extensive change experience themselves and hands-on change experience themselves. Not necessarily, and sorry to say this, if you're from a consultancy background, it's not necessarily a consultancy background if you haven't had enough hands-on experience, because there tends to be the luxury when you're outsourcing to consultancy. Yes, you're making sure that consultants take on one or two different pieces of work, but it's different when it's in-house. And so you really do want someone with the experience, but also someone who is commercially minded, because they won't overestimate the change effort. When organisations are looking at change still, it's still seen as a luxury. It's not seen as a mandatory in many organisations. Big banks and financial institutions definitely have change practices. They have change practitioners, and those pieces of work run through pretty robust pipelines because they need to be. But not all organisations, small, medium, those who've never dealt with change before and just forming up their project side of the business, then there's definitely going to be argy-bargy insofar as volume and size of change support. So you want to make sure from a commercial perspective you're not overestimating the effort and having change managers twiddle their thumbs, for want of a better example, while they're waiting for pieces of work to get legs. Because your best change people will also be quite delivery focused, and they won't want to hang around and waste time. Certainly not a high performer. And so what you want to make sure of is you're introducing And what you want to do is ensure that you're introducing the right people with the right skill set at the right time, and that they're adding value, not impeding or asking too many questions when there isn't much clarity. And a lot of that has to do with the expertise and the change intelligence of the individual coming in, and whether they're able to flex to where the project or program is at and be helping with communications, helping run potentially some workshops to get key messages. And sometimes that can help clarify the scope. The other thing to consider if it's a smaller piece of work is whether the project manager can simply have some templates that they run the change through so that they can actually manage the change. I wouldn't highly recommend it, but definitely within some smaller organisations, if you have a project manager who has communications background, for example, or have some experience in it, they can do light touch change. It's not perfect, but it's a starting point. And once again, this comes down to the commercialism. When looking at programs, and I want to highlight this because it is really relevant, anything that is a program has multiple streams of work within a project is a program, and programs absolutely will need a dedicated change person and potentially more than one. It's often underestimated, the amount of change effort, and the justification in that is timelines, deliverables to different audiences, different scope. Well, therefore, you might have a change person across two similarly impacting line items in a program or streams of work in a program. What I would caution is don't assume that one change person could do a program of work, because you more than likely will have 1, 2, maybe 3 project managers under a program, or different leads. So sometimes it's the project manager as a project lead, but it's the same thing. You will need multiple change people, and especially if then you have training that needs to be developed, if you have briefings that need to be developed, it is unrealistic to think that a change person can go to that depth and breadth of work and that you only need one change resource. It's simply impossible. So you want to set the program up for success when looking at the change resourcing and change effort. Then if you consider you have a portfolio of work, you have change effort, you might have 4 or 5 change managers across a portfolio of work in a particular large business area who are all working on different changes to then be implemented at different times. As a result of that change effort and the amount of change resource within that area, one of the key things that you might transition your thinking to is, after a while, as they get traction, is thinking about flipping the model and having change receivers versus change managers and deliverers. Because what you start to see is that there are various areas of the business that are constantly receiving change. And this is definitely a sign of change maturity, is that actually you would have change managers who are working on pieces of work from the business perspective, who are there to assess what impact, this particular business area is getting 4 different changes from other areas of the business, and that you, from a location perspective, from a change manager perspective, could be working in the receiving business area and assessing and working on tailoring communications, particularly to that business area. It is a far more mature model. It's one that definitely, when you're looking at change practice of some size, is you're going to start to consider that model, because it's not necessarily about what work's getting delivered to that business area. It's about how this business area adopts the change. And there is value in a local lead being able to translate and adapt the general information that people are giving them to the teams that they know well, who they've got profile and relationships with, and the leadership team, so that the leadership team understands the swathe of work that is coming through to their particular business area. As I said, it is a maturity model discussion, and one that many organisations never really get to, but you can start to see in more mature change practices that potentially the model should flip, versus being about projects and delivering and doing to receiving and tailoring the information. So you might have a change person who's simply providing all of the briefings and the detail, but the receiver of the change, working with the leaders of that department or local area, can translate and make sure that he's fit for purpose, because that is the hard work, especially if it's enterprise-wide change that's being worked on, is more the receiver end. Then thinking about the change effort insofar as delivery gives you an indicator around the change requirement or capacity that leaders need to have to actually receive the change, and that business people need to have, like the front line, middle management need to have the capacity to receive the change. And so you can map that through if you've got the right change effort sizing happening at the beginning. Needless to say, sometimes you just get it wrong. Sometimes the impact assessment as you go through and the scope shifts a little bit, or scope clarity starts to come to the fore. And definitely when unpacking the impacts in detail, it really does highlight and you discover new things that weren't known before, or as you've gone and asked the detailed questions, of course, then more clarity comes to the fore regarding processes which might be impacted, or other systems and subsequent systems, security requirements, those type of things that weren't known before. However, as the team are going through the process of implementation or preparing for implementation, they uncover all of the detailed aspects. Then all of a sudden your detailed impact assessment could actually flag up some really big change which wasn't uncovered before, and therefore change effort increases a lot, which in turn may delay go live, may mean training needing to be formed up in a very fast fashion to be able to ensure that everyone is across that level of change. By having the portfolio and by having multiple change coverage if required, then the expectation is that as projects or pieces of work cycle through their life cycle, then the change effort may vary a little bit closer to go lives, or you may be able to gauge the change capacity and maturity of the organisation through multiple changes that are delivered. It may highlight structures that aren't in place that need to be in place, for example, communication structures, regular briefings, and eventually the organisation starts to mature in that way, because the requirement from a change perspective is that there are clear avenues of communication to be able to engage leaders, and then that has leadership forums form up. Like there's a definite link between the ability to change in an organisation, the change effort that's required, and the structures that are required to support it. And in fact, you can have a little bit less change effort at times if those structures are in place, because then the change manager is not having to create a forum, not having to deal with the administration around it, or having to do it all as such, because the communication area is really maturing in their approach. And so the change ecosystem that I talk about also plays a role in this whole change effort discussion. But for now, if you're sizing change effort for change, then you are looking at the project deliverables, the scope, the risk to the organisation, then getting the appropriate skill set in place based on the timing and requirement. And yes, it is good to have change people who are experienced in understanding design all the way through the process. If you don't have a change person, if they're a little bit more junior and you're bringing them into a project, bring them in closer to a go live runway, because they might struggle in the design stage of a project or program because they don't deal with uncertainty well. I think that's a maturity aspect that happens consciously for change managers. If they've been in projects or programs and are reflecting that they have a need for clarity, then don't go into projects too early. So a lot of it has to do with making sure that people are well matched to the pieces of work that they're going on to. And once again, looking at change effort, a lot of it has to do with the change ecosystem in your organisation, whether you've got the right structures into place, which means that the change effort doesn't need to be as sizable because it is using existing structures, processes, which are known to be effective. I have to put that in there because sometimes these structures exist, but they're not effective at all. So consider these things when looking at resourcing for your portfolio of work or for a project or program. As I mentioned, you're also considering if there's a business analyst on the project that the change manager can have some access to and can work with to get some work leveraged from that BA. And or if you're a small organisation, whether you have a project person who shows all of the characteristics of being able to write communications and handle the change. I have been a project/change manager on smaller pieces of work through my career, and that has been because I have the ability to do both and I'm comfortable doing both. But on a big piece of work or a big program, it's not appropriate that it's seen that the program manager, for example, is going to handle communications as well. It's just simply not feasible. Hope this helps. I hope it's given you a couple of reference points if you are in that resourcing seat, if you're considering how do we have this work well, if you're questioning the change resource currently in your organisation, the type of things you want to look at is a portfolio of work, and having a look at how strong the project arm is and whether the change arm is in fact compensating or supporting or overcompensating the project side. And you don't want that to happen. You want both levers in the organisation to be as strong as each other and both well respected. And the final note, I'll say it's hard to resource and resource well. You're dealing with people and you're dealing with various skill sets. You need someone who can come in and flex to the culture of an organisation, but also a project manager, also business stakeholders. It is not easy. And if you've ever run a PMO or if you've ever run a change practice, I'm sure you're nodding, and I acknowledge it is not a perfect formula. There is no perfect formula for this. However, the more change intelligent you are, if you're running a change practice, if you understand people well, if you've got a commercial mindset and you're there with the PMO leads and working well together and you respect both disciplines, then teaming is so important in this type of environment to support each other and to keep those constant conversations, and you're really aspiring to a high-performing change practice, getting really good talent in, maintaining that talent, securing that talent, and creating that positive team environment, then you will do really well in your change practice and also your PMO, because both should be symbiotic. They should be working together. And just as I finish, I'll do a couple of shout outs, because in my career, I've worked with some fantastic PMO people. Chris, Mike, Irene, Ryan, some of these people were the best people who I worked with in my career, who we really were quite symbiotic and on the same page. And so big shout out to them and Andrew. I've had a lot of really great change practitioners work with me, Nick, and definitely like great trainers. I've been quite blessed through my career. I'm quite grateful for those who I mentioned, but also those who I haven't mentioned, because Vic, Jess, there's so many people who've just been so impactful in my career, and I've been lucky enough to work with, right? So there are awesome people out there, and if you're finding that when you're sizing change effort, when you're bringing people on board, you're really struggling and having to let people go for all sorts of reasons, the one thing I will say to you is just learn from it, and you will get better and better at being able to bring the right vibe, the right energy, and the right skill sets to your change. It takes time and it takes experience to be able to get a little bit better at it. It's never perfect, but definitely this is what experience is all about. I hope you have a wonderful day, and just remember that change matters, because you, your people, your team, your PMOs and your change practices, they all matter. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening.